if we go back to 2010, we would find that when asked to list the things about which they are most concerned, 1% of the population, which is extrapolated from the people polled, of course, 1% of the population listed Europe as an important issue. Okay? Immigration was there, and obviously part of the answer to the question I'm about to ask you will be the tying together of those two issues. That is surely the point, and so the 1% becomes slightly misleading. It includes immigration. If you were to add immigration to Europe, the figure would have been much higher. But that means that in 2010, people weren't linking the two. If you fast forward to 2014, when we had some European elections, only 8% of the population identified Europe as a concern. So the short answer to the question I'm about to ask you is that people who were concerned about immigration were persuaded that leaving the European Union would address their concerns. I don't know if anybody still believes that, actually. I mean, statistically, it's very, very hard to sustain. But we're going to have to pretend for at least one generation that it's true, because the alternative is to admit a mistake. And the chance to admit that mistake expired in December of 2019. So what happened? It's a lovely symmetry to have a 10-year window, which we can examine. 11 p.m. this evening, we will, by instrument of law, leave the European Union. You won't notice any difference until a year from now, actually, until January 2021, when any changes will become apparent and evident and unavoidable. But bizarrely, and in many ways, the very essence of Brexit is contained within what I'm about to say. Bizarrely, we don't know what's going to happen then either, because the crucial bit of negotiation is supposed to take place in the next 11 months. Or, I mean, it can't start just yet, because obviously the timetabling and the sequencing is set by the senior negotiating partner, and that ain't us, and that really just is a statement of fact, sadly. We don't know whether or not, for example, the advice that the government is currently providing and paying to provide you, as you can tell from the adverts on this radio station, we still don't know whether or not this advice will hold come January 2021, because we don't know what arrangements we're going to come to with the European Union. I don't want to be the Banquo's ghost at the feast. I don't want any scraps today. I don't want to revisit old territories. Facts lost, and that's not a patronising observation. Facts lost, feelings won, and that's fine. All of the most important decisions I've taken in my life have been based more on my feelings than my facts. Well, I'm thinking of my marriage and wanting to be a parent. The two most significant elements of my human existence have been about feelings, not facts. I'm a little bit surprised to see that translate onto the political sphere, but we shouldn't be that surprised. There's plenty of precedent for it. But we still don't know what Brexit means. That's the weirdest thing of all. The arrangements that we come to with the European Union, if they can be signed off and agreed within a year, which is frankly unlikely, but I think the pressure is on, isn't it? And I think if we learn anything from the general election, it was probably that Boris Johnson at the moment is in a rather enviable position, in that if he can honestly claim that he's got Brexit done as a triumph by signing up to a deal that Theresa May had essentially rejected and breaking the pledge that he said no British Prime Minister could countenance, and having a form of border in the Irish Sea, then I honestly think he could just stick the word Brexit on a bucket of cold sick and sell it to a portion of the British public as a glorious victory. I hate to say that, and I know it sounds patronising and condescending, but it is just true. If you fell for the Get Brexit Done line, the idea that you're going to be sceptical when you're told that Brexit's all gone brilliantly, well, okay, so what are we looking at? Well, almost certainly we are looking at slower growth, but you won't have it described to you as slower growth. You'll have it described to you as growth. So rather than compare with 2016, they'll compare with 2019, perhaps. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. closures, company closures, almost inevitable. Some have already, of course, started happening. The financial cost you probably won't see in any Brexit-supporting newspaper, but it's there if you want it. The financial penalties that the country has already endured. People stopped pretending that there would be £350 million a week for the NHS pretty much before the ink was dry on the referendum result, didn't they? And yet, as naive snowflakes like me thought, the evidence of that particular con was not enough to distract people or to persuade people of the existence of the con. There you go. And of course, we are being asked today to celebrate the surrendering of freedoms that we've enjoyed for the best part of 50 years, which is odd. I mean, I get that you can celebrate somebody else losing their freedoms. What are you celebrating today? Well, that French person can't come and live in London anymore without having to jump through as yet unspecified hoops. Okay, right. But you can't either. Doesn't matter. I loved one of Nick's later callers in the programme talking about the role that language has probably played in this process. It's something that has occurred to me, but I haven't articulated it as well as he did. Because I talked about road signs. I remember driving around France and Italy and seeing road signs naming cities in other countries, other European countries, obviously. And something about that, psychologically, given that this has ended up being mostly about feelings, psychologically, I genuinely think that was different. You were also now supposed to be celebrating the Domino Effect, which would have seen other European Union countries queue up to follow us out of the door. All of the statistical evidence is that the opposite has happened. We have arguably done more for European Union unity by leaving and showing our former partners what leaving looks like than the world's most effective spin doctors, demagogues and gurus could have achieved, because they look at the reality of what we've done and decide. Even Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini in Italy have stepped back sharpish from the precipice of any form of European Union exit for their countries, France and Italy, and they are, politicians who don't even pretend that they're not far right. We still, in this country, labour under the ministrations of people in public life who pretend they're not far right while behaving. Well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's almost certainly a duck, unless you're getting hired by the BBC to appear on panel programmes, in which case it's definitely not a duck. It's balance. So I want positive answers as well, maybe, if that's not too much to ask. I don't think it would have been helpful today if you're wondering what questions I decided not to ask you. The obvious one would have been, so what exactly are you celebrating? But, I mean, we both know the answer to that. You're celebrating either profoundly important feelings or meaningless slogans, depending on your perspective. So I say, what are you celebrating? And you say freedom, and you mean it. You have been persuaded that you're somehow freer tomorrow morning than you are this morning. I think that's nonsense. I really do. And I've always thought over the last 3.5 years that you would see that eventually too. But a lot of people haven't. So you're celebrating freedom, a meaningless slogan for half of the country, but apparently a profound emotional fillip for the other half. So that wouldn't have been helpful. You'd ring me, you'd say freedom. I'd say, what can you do tomorrow that you couldn't do yesterday? And then you'd fall apart and go viral. But there's not as much fun in that anymore as there was when there was still a chance of calling out the con. I always think of that line in Clockwise, written by Michael Frayn, issued by John Cleese. A beautiful line, which I'll slightly get wrong because I haven't got it in front of me. But it's not the despair, Dawn. I can cope with the despair. It's the hope that gets me every time. And oddly, the result of the last general election took away any hope for people who would rather stay part of the largest trading bloc in the world and enjoy freedom of movement to just over 30 countries in which you'd be free to work, study, live and love. What are you celebrating today? Well, we can't move there anymore. All right, crack on. So that's why I'm not trying to be funny today by asking you to ring in and parrot a slogan about freedom or sovereignty or possibly fish and blue passports. Although fish is looking a bit iffy now, to be honest with you, and the blue passports have been made in France. But hey, get your little flag out, wave it away. That wouldn't be helpful. It would also be a bit disrespectful, I think, for one day only. Even if you don't know what you're celebrating, nobody should be a party pooper. All right? So what happened? Over that 10-year period, with the caveats that I've already put in place, we've gone from 1% of the country thinking that Europe was a major issue, a significant issue in their lives, to Europe being the defining issue for this country and the next 2, 3, 4 generations. Who knows how things are going to pan out? Again, that was the other runner and rider this morning. The other possibility for conversation would have been the penny drop moments when you thought everybody else would realise what you understood to be the case. For me, it'd be moments like Rees-Mogg talking about how we wouldn't see the benefits for 100 years, was it, or 50? I forget. Those were the moments where I thought, well, hang on a minute, even the cheerleaders now are having to climb down from their lofty claims. Remember when I used to sit here and read out those long lists of lies, of claims made by everybody from David Davis to Liam Fox to Boris Johnson to Michael Gove, and they were rendered untrue within weeks of the result coming in. And I mean, I can't complain too vociferously because it's obviously worked wonders for my life and career, but I did honestly think that there'd come a moment where the scales tipped. It will be the easiest deal in human history. That we will hold all the cards. They'll be queuing up to do deals with us. The morning after the result, we'd go to Berlin, not Brussels. I mean, the ignorance. The picture of David Davis with a big grin on his face and no notes on his table. And the European Union, of course, still negotiating from the position they made clear in July of 2016. You cannot have full access to the single market without... Oh, and there's another one. They claimed that we could. They claimed that we would have full access to the single market. So that's not happened. And as I say, it's almost liberating to feel that sense of duty lift off one's shoulders. Those of us who believe that journalism is about giving the public the information they need to make informed decisions have lost, categorically and completely. But I still want to know how. And we'll start with that statistic from 2010. 1% of the population considered Europe to be a major issue when contemplating how they would vote. Today, Europe has, depending on your perspective, either seen as jump off gloriously into the dark that will soon be untrammeled light, or it's seen as undertake an act of epic and unnecessary self-harm. So what happened in that 10-year window? I know it's actually a 6.5-year window, really, but give me a break. I like the symmetry of the decade. Give me a ring now. You will get through. 0345 606 0973. I would urge you to ring in if you are working on an answer akin to, well, we woke up to the truth or something. I was one of the 1%, and thank God everybody now sees it like we see it. I'm going to do my best not to revisit or reopen old wounds for people who are now pretending that they voted for something that was never going to happen. I would, by close of play today, like to have found a sentence or two upon which most of us could agree, regardless of what we feel, think, or, I make no apology for this, but on this programme, understand something, a sentence or two upon which we could all agree.